Hey everyone, this is Karenology. You won't believe the insane drama that just unfolded. Let's get into it. The second I stepped out of the cruiser, my boots landed in the dust like I'd never left. Hot wind slapped me across the face, the kind that carries the dry scent of mesquite and spite. My name wasn't on the mailbox anymore. The number was scratched off. And my key? Might as well have been for a different planet. I tried it anyway. The lock didn't turn. A voice called from the porch. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back. This is Homeowner Association controlled property now." She was 20-something, with perfect teeth and a walkie-talkie on her hip like it made her bulletproof. The badge on her chest said, Temporary Property Reclamation Coordinator. That's not a real title. That's bureaucratic play dress. "I own this house," I said, jaw locked tight. She didn't flinch. "Our records show the property is undergoing emergency reassessment due to multiple Class B violations." Behind her, I saw movement. Someone was in my kitchen. 2 of them, wearing gloves, measuring tape in hand. One took a picture of the old wall clock. The other opened the fridge. That's when I felt it. That dry, metallic taste of something breaking inside. Not anger, not yet. Just the dead quiet before it. The kind that creeps in when you know someone's crossed a line they won't be able to uncross. "I want my dog." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "My dog, Sam, yellow mutt, was in the backyard this morning. Don't pretend you didn't see him." She looked at her clipboard. "Animal control has already been dispatched. You can file for pet recovery within 72 hours. I took a step forward. She put a hand to her radio. 2 men appeared from the side of the house, arms crossed, HOA windbreakers on. Not real security. Not real anything. But they had size. And numbers. I didn't move. Just stared at them. Long enough that one of them shifted his weight. That was my house. My wife picked the damn tile in the kitchen. I buried my old dog in the front yard under the pecan tree. And now I couldn't even get inside. They called the sheriff's deputy, a young guy, nervous. I could see it in the way he adjusted his belt. "Look, Mr. Carter, I get it," he said, voice low. "But right now, if you try to push this, I'll have to take you in for obstruction." Obstruction of what? He didn't answer, so I let them walk me off my own porch. Like I was the stranger. Like I hadn't built half the wiring in that place with my own hands. That night, I slept in my truck, parked 2 blocks down in the lot behind the old feed store. I stared at my own dark windows until my eyes dried out. They thought I'd just give up, walk away like the others probably had. But I wasn't like the others, and they didn't know the system they hijacked. I designed it. Funny thing about building a system from the ground up, you know exactly where the cracks are. The morning after they locked me out, I drove 70 miles east to a scrapyard that didn't have a website, didn't take cards, and only opened when the owner felt like unlocking the chain. I traded a rusted inverter for a set of salvaged relays and a thermal imager. Paid in cash. No questions. Sam wasn't at the county shelter. I checked 3, called 5 more. Nothing. Either they were lying or he was already gone. That part, that loss, sat heavy. The kind of weight you don't talk about. Just carry. Like a dent in the rib cage. By noon, I was under the overpass south of town, kneeling in gravel, arms elbow deep in a junction box I hadn't touched in 15 years. Still worked. The cables led west, buried deep and dark, to a utility shed behind my old neighborhood. A place I wired myself back in the day when contracts were still on paper. And no one asked for background checks. That's where I plugged in. First came the flood of noise. Wireless handshakes, device IDs, pings from smart locks and doorbells. HOA homes ran hot on automated junk. Cameras, sensors, everything talking, everything listening. I filtered for my house. Got it. Internal mesh net was still up. No one had found the legacy node, the one I buried behind the garage wall. They changed the locks, changed the passwords, but they didn't know what they didn't know. That node still whispered to me. I watched the front door open. A man in khakis and a golf shirt stepped in. Clipboard, walkie-talkie. Another one. 2 more. They moved through like they owned it, took pictures, measured walls. Paused by the photo of my wife on the hallway shelf. I killed the lights. Not a full blackout. Just a flicker, enough to make them stop. One of them checked his phone. No signal. The system had rerouted through my channel. They called for backup. I watched them leave, but I didn't feel better. Not even close. That kind of invasion carves something permanent into you. Like finding fingerprints on your skin you didn't know were there. Back in the truck, I scribbled on a napkin. List of names I recognized from the entry logs. Some were HOA staff. Others were contractors. One name stopped me cold. Greg M. He was my apprentice, back when I still taught people how to do things right. Good kid. Smart. Too smart. Last I heard, he was working corporate infrastructure for some city project. So what was he doing accessing my home's control board? I stared at that napkin until the ink bled. Then folded it and lit it on fire with the truck's cigarette lighter. No evidence. Not yet. I needed more than revenge. I needed a plan. They took my house, took my dog, took my past, but I still had something they couldn't touch. The system beneath their feet. They wanted a war, I'd give them one, but it wouldn't look the way they expected. The next move had to be quiet. Not dramatic, not loud. They expected loud. Expected me to protest, to rage, to beg. That's how they controlled people. Predict their emotion, then use it against them. But they didn't know what I'd already seen, what I'd already built. I parked my truck 2 blocks down again, same spot behind the old feed store. This time I walked. No direct path. Zigzagged through yards, cut through an alley, ducked behind hedges. I knew the angles, where cameras pointed, where shadows fell. My hands still remembered the weight of the cable spools. My fingers remembered the feel of raw copper. Behind the neighborhood utility shed, hidden behind a rusted compressor, I opened a panel no one else knew existed, pulled out a casing the size of a lunchbox. Inside, my old manual override. A fossil from another era, but it still hummed with purpose. I wired it into the live feed, rerouted it through a ghost protocol I'd designed back when security was more about creativity than regulations. Now I could listen, and more importantly, I could interrupt. The system gave me logs, timestamps, usernames, access routes. One stood out again. Greg. Only now it wasn't just my house. He'd been inside 6 others. All flagged for emergency code enforcement. All occupied by retirees or disabled residents. All now listed as under review. It wasn't cleanup, it was clearance. Someone wanted that land. I copied every log, encrypted it, and stored it in 3 flash drives. One I kept. One I mailed to an old contact. Didn't write a return address. The third I buried in a peanut butter jar behind the east fence line of a park no one visited. That night, I called a number I hadn't dialed in over a decade. "Still alive?" a voice croaked on the third ring. "Not sure," I said. "You still know how to pull building permits from under a blanket order?" "Depends. Who pissed you off?" "Schot." "Homeowner Association." A long pause. Then a chuckle. "That figures." His name was Ellis. Retired city planning clerk. Back in the day, he could make a duplex disappear off a map with a coffee-stained form and a Sharpie. Now he just tended goats in the hills. I gave him the address. Told him what I suspected. Rezoning fraud. Possibly bigger. He agreed to dig. No promises. I hung up and just sat in the truck, listening to the wind rattle the aluminum siding of the abandoned lot across the street. I wanted to believe this was just greed. Just petty land theft wrapped in HOA regulations. But deep down, something colder was growing. Something calculated. Next morning, I returned to the lot. Only this time, I didn't bring tools. I brought questions, started knocking on doors. Not my old neighbors, the ones who left, or rather, the ones who'd been pushed out. I found 2, a widow named Carla, who now lived in a trailer by the highway, and a guy named Vince, who used to run the neighborhood garden club. Both said the same thing. They'd been cited out. Random inspections. Code violations that didn't exist. Escalating fines until they couldn't pay. Then came the contractors. The temporary access team. Same uniforms. Same fake smiles. And when they left, their homes weren't theirs anymore. This wasn't a war. It was a harvest, and I was going to salt the field. I never thought I'd find myself standing in the middle of a burned-down greenhouse at dawn, holding a cold cup of gas station coffee and thinking about land maps. But there I was. Vince's old garden lot, torched months ago under safety hazard abatement. You could still see the black outlines of planter boxes like skeletal ribs under the ash. Vince said it started with a surprise inspection. They cited him for improper soil storage. Then came the fines. Then the fire. Accidental, they claimed. Except the fire report was sealed, and the contractor who inspected his property was listed under the same vendor code as the team that had taken over my house. I started digging through zoning records. Ellis came through faster than expected. He sent over a parcel history report that made my skin crawl. My entire block, and 6 more around it, had been pre-approved for commercial redevelopment under a closed session motion 6 months ago. Just one problem. The lots weren't theirs. Not yet. That's when the notices started appearing on people's doors. Quiet ones, with legal words that most folks didn't understand, and fewer still could afford to fight. The Homeowner Association was paving a road straight through our lives and calling it improvement. That night, I drove out to the edge of the city grid, a place where the streetlights flicker and the road turns to gravel. Found Greg's truck parked behind a prefab unit with tinted windows. Waited. He stepped out around midnight, phone to his ear. Laughing. Still tall. Still walking like he owned his shadow. I waited until he hung up, then stepped into the beam of the porch light. "Long time, Greg." He froze, then smiled, guarded. "Mr. Carter, didn't expect you keyed into my house." He didn't deny it, just scratched his chin. "It wasn't personal. They contracted my firm. System-wide override. Nothing I could do. You could have said no." "That's not how things work now." I looked at him for a long second. Saw the unease ripple beneath the surface of his confidence. You used to care about integrity." He shrugged. "I care about contracts now. And pensions." "You think any of this is personal?" "It's just math. Property use, return value, net yield." I leaned in. "You forgot one number." "What's that?" "I bet you how many bridges you burn before there's nothing left to cross." He said nothing, and I walked. Back in the truck, I recorded everything I could remember from that conversation. Time, place, context. Sent it to Ellis with one note. "If I disappear, start here." The next 3 days were a blur of asphalt and wire. I reactivated a network of old clients, people who owed me favors, or at least remembered the jobs I didn't charge for. I got blueprints, access codes, wiring layouts for community centers, HOA substations, and 2 private server closets, labeled as maintenance storage. It was all connected. They weren't just using HOA rules to scare people off. They were funneling data, traffic, utility trends, predicting which lots would resist and which would fold. Greg wasn't just implementing the override system. He was helping test behavioral algorithms for private developers. They were betting on our silence, projecting collapse, monetizing obedience. But they hadn't planned for me, and they definitely hadn't planned for what I was building next. I closed that night with a soldering iron in my hand and a live board on my lap. The glow of the coil painting the inside of the truck cab orange. My eyes were tired, but my hands? Steady as ever. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but they'd just given me reason to start again. It started with the lights. 3 nights later, the entire east sector of the development, 8 blocks, went dark for 7 minutes. Not a full blackout. Just enough to send automated alerts to every phone registered with the Homeowner Association. Panic messages, conflicting timestamps, camera feeds stuck in loops, emergency backups failed. Then, just as suddenly, it all came back. On the surface, it looked like a glitch. To the system, it was chaos. And for me, it was confirmation. My ghost protocol worked. I'd built it years ago as a redundancy test. They never found it because no one ever looks for analog in a digital age. I didn't celebrate. I moved. Night after night, I triggered sequences, timed flickers, environmental sensors that read false data, phantom motion alerts, noise. I wasn't attacking. I was training the system to chase its own tail, and while they scrambled to debug, I walked right through the cracks. Ellis called on the 4th day. "They've issued a procurement request," he said. "Same vendor code. Expansion phase. They're moving faster." How fast? Month, maybe less. That meant I didn't have time to build an army. I needed a scalpel, not a hammer. I went back to Carla, the widow in the trailer, told her everything. She didn't blink, just nodded and poured me black coffee thick enough to chew. Said she'd kept a ledger. HOA fines, names, notes, dates, even pictures. She handed me a plastic bag full of old receipts, and a notepad. One name came up 4 times. Cassandra Myers. Board chair. Lived in a gated lot 5 streets over. Untouchable, supposedly. But she made a mistake. She used the same Wi-Fi mesh as the other homes. HOA mandated firmware updates, centralized for community safety, which meant her smart locks, thermostats, cameras, they all danced to the same rhythm. And I had the music. I watched her routine. 4 days. Morning Pilates, 2 Zoom calls, and a late-night wine habit she tried to hide by dimming her kitchen lights. I knew when she took out the trash. I knew where her backup key was taped, but I didn't break in. I just turned up the thermostat to 90, turned off her bedroom fan, switched every smart light in the house to red, then reset her cameras to record only static. She filed a complaint the next morning, said she felt violated. Why for calling me what? That's when I hit the switch again. Not on her house, on the HOA boardroom. They'd recently installed remote access conference tools. I looped their feeds, played back meetings out of sync. Half the board thought the meeting was at 10 a.m., the other half at 2 p.m. No one showed up. Twice. Then came the proxy error. I redirected internal permissions, gave board members conflicting control over each other's access tiers. One guy thought he'd locked the community center. Another thought he'd opened it for repairs. It ended with someone getting stuck inside overnight and breaking a window to get out. Panic spread. They called in IT contractors. Greg among them. I watched his face through the feed. Tight-lipped. Nervous. He knew. He just didn't know how deep I'd gone. Back in the truck, I reread Carla's notes. There was something else. An expense entry labeled Grant Site Prep. Same timestamp as the removal order from my house. I looked it up. The city had issued a community development grant. Land value marked triple if the property was classified as underutilized. They weren't just stealing homes, they were turning them into profit centers, and I had just enough thread now to pull the whole tapestry down. There's a sound old wires make when they overheat, like a sigh turning into a scream. I hadn't heard it in years. But that night, tucked inside the old crawl space under the abandoned utility shack, I heard it loud and clear. The city's main relay was groaning, and I was about to lean on it harder. I had 2 days until the next HOA board meeting. One they'd rescheduled in a panic, off record, in a private lot they thought was secure. I had the coordinates, and more importantly, I had the feed. The relay room's patchboard still took analog bypass. I ran my ghost line straight into their hard line and waited for them to talk. But something else hit me first. Greg, he found me. I heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Felt it in my ribs before I even turned. Didn't think you'd hide somewhere this obvious, he said. Voice low, flat. I didn't answer. Just kept stripping wire. I'm not here to stop you, he said. But you need to know something. I paused. Looked up. They're moving up the timeline. They're calling it Phase 0. Full clearance. Your property, Carla's, Vince's, they're scheduled for demolition next week. No notices this time, just action. My hand tightened around the pliers. They think if they move fast enough, no one can respond. Greg added. They're wrong, but you've got maybe 72 hours, tops. Why are you telling me this? He hesitated. Because I helped build the machine, and because I watched what it did to my father. That stopped me cold. Your father was in the pilot program? He nodded. Zone 6B. He died thinking he forgot to pay a fine. They buried him in debt that never existed. Something in his voice cracked then. Just for a second, I didn't forgive him, but I saw the wound. He handed me a key. Server closet, community center, behind the mop sink. You'll need what's inside. Then he turned and disappeared into the dark. I didn't move for a long time, just sat there with the buzz of the wires in my ears and 1,000 volts of fury crawling down my spine. By morning, I'd made my choice. I hit the community center before noon. No one expected someone like me, dirt-streaked, jacket zipped to the neck, face unreadable, to be anything but another burned-out volunteer. I walked straight past the front desk, down the hall, into the supply room. The mop sink was still there, and behind it, the vent cover Greg meant. Inside, a panel, unlabeled, locked. I used his key. The door clicked open, and there it was, a stack of drives, labeled by hand, behavioral heat maps, predictive exit trends, compliance risk reports, audio logs, video logs, everything. The machine wasn't just stealing homes. It was watching us decide to surrender, and recording how we broke. I took the whole rack. That night, I called Ellis. Oh, can you still print parcel reports with signatures? I can make it sing. Then get ready to forge a war drum. I had what I needed. Not just to fight, to detonate. The morning before the board meeting, I shaved for the first time in weeks. Not for them, for me, for the man I used to be, back when my name meant something. Back when I could walk into a room and people looked me in the eye, not over my shoulder. I put on my oldest jacket, the one with the burn mark on the sleeve from the time I rewired a firehouse with one working hand. The threads were frayed, the zipper stiff, but it still fit, still held the shape of my spine. Ellis met me in the parking lot of the old VFW hall. He handed me a folder. Thick, stamped, artificial. Parcel transfers, reclassification orders, forged inspections, he said. All signed, all backdated, all fake. And all yours? He smiled without humor. No? Now they're all yours. I flipped through them. Impeccable. Even the seal emboss looked real. They won't believe it, I said. They don't have to, Ellis replied. You're not here to prove a point. You're here to pull a pin. The meeting was scheduled for 7:30 p.m. Off-grid. No public access. But the HOA board forgot one detail. The smart building they chose had a synced media system. Once I was in range, my drive connected automatically. I didn't show up in person. I didn't need to. At 7:34 p.m., as Cassandra Myers adjusted her mic and cleared her throat, every screen in the building flickered. Every light dimmed. Then, a loop of video feeds. Carla in tears as she packed her trailer. Vince arguing with a contractor outside his burning garden. My own kitchen being cataloged by strangers with iPads. Then came the heat maps, compliance graphs, voice logs. Everything I pulled from the server closet. Data stitched into pattern. Pattern stitched into motive. Motive painted in numbers. The room broke. They scrambled to shut it down. Couldn't. The override protocol had no kill switch. I made sure of it. One board member tried to unplug the console. It zapped him. Mild, but memorable. Cassandra stood up, shaking. "This is unauthorized." Sa. That's when the screens flipped again. Ellis's forged documents. Parcel reports. Rezone maps. All stacked neatly in cascading layers, like a trial with no judge and no mercy. I watched from my truck, didn't smile, didn't cheer, just watched them realize they weren't untouchable. That someone had been watching them longer than they'd been watching everyone else. Later that night, Greg called. Just 2 words. They panicked. I asked, "And the demolition order?" "Frozen. Indefinitely." "And Cassandra?" "She's gone. No resignation, no statement, just gone." I hung up and drove. Not home, not yet, but close enough to see my roofline over the hill. The lights were off. The wind still moved the pecan tree like it was waving to me. I pulled over, killed the engine, and sat in silence. It wasn't over. Not until I decided what came next. Not revenge. Rebuild. I didn't sleep that night. Not from adrenaline, that had burned off hours ago, but from something colder, emptier. The kind of stillness that settles in after the noise ends. Like standing in the middle of a battlefield after the last shot's been fired and realizing you're still upright. At dawn, I stood outside Carla's trailer with 2 thermoses and a bag of gas station muffins. She opened the door, looked at my face, and said nothing. Just took the coffee, poured half into a chipped ceramic mug, and handed it back. We drank in silence. They're not done," she said eventually. "I know. They'll rebuild, rename, regroup. Same engine, new paint." I nodded. "Then we salt the ground." We made a list. Not of people, of systems. Bank account shells, contractor shells, holding companies, LLCs stacked like Russian dolls. I used to think tech was the root of it all. But this was money with a mask. By noon, I was back in the crawl space, tracing fiber lines with the patience of a surgeon. Every time the HOA had installed a smart meter. Every time they'd connected a home to shared infrastructure, they'd opened a door. I just had to walk back through them. And I wasn't alone anymore. Vince came back. Word had spread. He wasn't the only one. Carla pulled in her niece, a data analyst from Dallas. A former city clerk emailed me anonymously with files tagged "for what it's worth." I didn't start a revolution. I lit a beacon. We mapped every digital route from HOA command to private developers. Every rerouted tax statement. Every grant forged. And then I launched the loop. It didn't go public. Not yet. This wasn't for a headline. It was for pressure. We targeted the developers' own internal compliance systems. The ones that triggered legal reviews when anomalies hit threshold. We fed them just enough noise. Overlapping parcel IDs, contradictory ownership markers, conflicting grant numbers. No accusations, just errors. Errors that made auditors nervous. Errors that froze escrow. And once frozen, we sent the real documents. The forged notices, the fake inspections, the behavioral data models. Not to the press, to the investors. Quietly, cleanly, without flair. They pulled out, one by one. I watched the paper collapse like a house eaten by termites. Cassandra had vanished, but her shadow still loomed over the contracts. With her gone and no return on investment in sight, the board fractured. 2 members resigned. One tried to sue the others. Another left town. Greg texted, "It's imploding," I wrote back. It was never built to stand. But I wasn't done. I walked the perimeter of my house that evening. Not inside, not yet, just the perimeter. I checked the grounding rods, the signal lines, the breaker box. It was still mine, even when I wasn't in it. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to a person, to the idea of the neighborhood. To the people who'd been forced out. I didn't know if I'd ever send it, but I needed to put the words somewhere. We survived you, I wrote, and now we'll outlive you. The wind picked up around midnight. I stood under the pecan tree, the same one I planted with my wife when we first bought the place. I could almost hear her voice in the rustle. And you did it your way, she used to say. Even when it hurt, it still hurt. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel hollow. It took me 3 days to step over the threshold. The house didn't feel like mine at first. Too clean in the wrong places, too dusty in the ones that used to matter. The fridge was unplugged. The couch cushions were flipped. My wife's coffee mug was missing from its place on the windowsill. They hadn't just taken space, they'd tried to erase comfort. I didn't try to fix everything. Just picked one thing, the fuse panel, and started there, opened it, cleaned the dust, replaced a blown breaker. The kind of work that brings the hands back to life, even if the heart's still catching up. I kept the front door open while I worked. People walked by, some glanced in. 1 or 2 nodded. No one said a word. But they saw me, and that mattered. On the second night, I found Sam's collar under the porch. Bent tag, frayed strap, no dog. I sat on the steps with it in my hand for a long time. The next morning, Carla and Vince stopped by. Brought a plant, said it was low maintenance. I planted it under the pecan tree. Didn't name it. Didn't need to. Then one by one, others came. The woman from Lot 8 who'd been cited for off-color curtains. Cheyenne, the veteran down the street who'd been fined for wind chimes. The teenager who built a ramp for his wheelchair-bound brother and got penalized for unapproved modifications. They didn't come for me. They came for each other, and so a new map began to draw itself. Not on paper, not through meetings, through borrowed tools, shared meals, quiet glances, the kind of community you can't design, only earn. Greg never showed up again. But one day, a box appeared on my porch. No note. Just a replacement for my wife's mug. Same shape. Same chipped edge on the handle. I left it on the sill where it belonged. One night, I walked the house with every light off. Just the moon and memory to guide me. Every creak in the floorboard said, "You're still here." I wasn't the man I was before, but I wasn't erased. I rebuilt the lock system. Not digital this time. Brass. Simple. Mechanical. No overrides. No back doors. Just one key. Mine. I made copies, handed them out one by one to the people who'd been burned. Not to open my house. To open the shed behind it. Tools. Supplies. Coffee. A space to rebuild what was taken. I didn't lead anything. I just left the door unlocked. Somewhere along the way, someone painted over the HOA sign at the neighborhood entrance. No name replaced it. Just a mural. A tree. A set of hands holding wire and soil and light. No motto, no rules, just memory and roots. The wind still moves through the pecan branches. Some nights I sit under it, feel the cold bark at my back, and listen. I don't need vengeance. I have something better. Legacy.